You are once again tuned into Ham Radio Perspectives. Lord help you. I'm Quinn, K8QS.
And I'm Tom, WA9TDD.
And Brother Tom, here we go. We have got another doozy. That's from the old Duesenberg car, a doozy of a show here with Larry, W7LDT, Lima Delta Tango. And Larry is going to talk with us about his life operating from airplanes. But before we go to him, we just want to say a couple of things here. He's a retired American Airlines pilot, former FAA designated pilot examiner, and a 50-year certified flight instructor. So he knows flying up and down and all around. He's now fully retired from that. He spends a lot of time hamming and geocaching, and most time, more than anything else, watching Ham Radio Perspectives, because he is a refined man who really understands this stuff. And not only that, but he comes from a family of hams, and not hams in the comic sense, but hams that are really ham radio operators. His father, Silent Key, was an amateur operator, his two brothers, and he's even got a nephew who's involved in ham radio. So this is Larry, W7LDT. Larry, we are so glad that we got in touch with you because this topic is fantastic. Thanks so much, buddy.
Well, I hope I can offer something.
Oh, hey, you can offer a lot. Back in the day, I was going to take lessons to try to learn how to fly. I wish I would have had an experienced person like you. So this whole idea, Tom, what do you think when I say to you that Larry is operating HF from an airliner? Do you think it's possible?
I think it's more than likely possible. Actually, when they're flying transcontinental over or transoceanic, they have HF radios on board and antenna system. So basically, you take your IC 7300, plug it into the cigarette lighter, and with a TR switch to the HF antenna on the aircraft, right, Larry?
And it would work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little more sophisticated that we had, if you want me to get into this now. But yeah, anytime you fly oceanic, you have to have HF. Obviously, VHF is all the line of sight, and about 350 to 400 miles after coasting out is the term they use. VHF is gone. And for those that don't know it, for civilian use over the land, we're always VHF AM. As we coast out, we have to switch over to HF. And I don't know if you were interested in hearing the story about how this all came about, but I knew that the HF radios we had on board were capable of tuning into the ham bands.
Right.
And so I played with it a couple times. Now, understand, when you're out over the water, you have to maintain a listening watch on the primary channel that they give you. And I'll talk about that process where you find out what those are if you're interested in that. But so we use HF Reg 1 to do that ATC communication stuff. And 2 was just sitting there as a backup. So I'd reach over and tune it up to 14.300 and listen to the Maritime Mobile Net, And so a lot of co-pilots would start asking me questions, and I hate to use the word ignorance, but that's what it truly was, because no one's ever taught them how this stuff works. And they teach you how to use it, but they don't tell you how it works. And many of them thought that somewhere out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there's a boat with a repeater sight on it, literally, that's relaying these signals. And I said, well, you're close. It's the ionosphere and the ocean that's relaying the signals. They had no comprehension of that, and I had actually considered doing some HF operations, but I wanted to find out what's legal first. And of course, when I'm on duty working, I can't really distract myself much from what's going on. Do you guys know Gordon West?
Yeah.
Okay. NA6, I forgot his call. Anyway, he's the master of all this stuff. So I contacted him. He came to one of my ham club meetings in Mesa, Arizona, and we had a nice visit. And I asked him about operating aeronautical mobile like this, and where is it not legal to do it? And basically, he said you just have to make sure you're not over a country that doesn't have an agreement with us for that. So I made sure I was in international water all the time. And I didn't do this a lot. I did it a few times, but it made me feel guilty. So when I'm supposed to be working, I'm playing instead. But one particular co-pilot was just challenging me that that I'm making all this stuff up. So I was tuning around in the 20-meter band, and I heard a guy in, I believe he was in Fort Worth, Texas, just having a rag chew with some guy up in Maine. And boy, you could hear them both real well. So I'll
bet you could.
And he came back and said, "Yeah, wow, big signal. Where are you?" So about that time, my co-pilot's eyes got the size of saucers. So I pursued it a little further and went to the Maritime Mobile Net and listened to them, and got to the point in the net where he was calling for anybody anywhere to check in, because they mainly want boats, and they want your location, your coordinates, and the size of the waves and the winds and temperature and all that. So I threw out my call sign, and he came back with that big signal thing again. And so I gave him my report, and we were like 20 degrees north and 150 west or something. I forgot exactly where we were. And I just said the winds are from 270 at 150 knots, and the temperature is minus 65 Celsius. And say that again. And I told him, and I said, "Oh, I forgot. I'm aeronautical mobile." And immediately the band lit up with boats on the water that all wanted to talk to the airplane. And I talked to a couple of them, but then shut it off. I needed to pay a little more attention and go back to work, But the radios that we have in these airplanes, I believe they were Collins brand. I never got to put my hands on one of them. I know they put out 435 watts. And we had one antenna, and the instruction manual said the antenna's in the tail of the airplane.
Right.
And each radio has a really nice auto tuner. The older ones had to tune every time you change frequency. The newer ones, you just hit the mic and you'd hear just a quick bleep. It had like 10,000 stored frequencies in it. So, we're all used to that stuff. That's how they all work in little radios or little world. But I did a little bit of research and found out that the antenna is not in the tail. It's actually the leading edge, or at least in the application I was flying, that was in a Boeing 757. If you look at those airplanes, the leading edge of that vertical stabilizer on the back of the plane is stainless steel polished. And some of that is for ice, preventing icing on the rudder. But that hunk of metal on the front of the vertical stab is the antenna. It's not, it's on the outside. And it's got two coax connectors at the bottom of it.
Is that insulated from the rest of the metal?
It must be. I don't know. I didn't get to crawl up in there and look, but I mainly got the word from the radio technicians, in the maintenance hangar, how that all was put together. I made one other contact, and that was it. And that was way down in the South Pacific, around the Christmas Island area, if you're familiar with where that is. But, 435 watts in an antenna that's tuned perfect, that's 7 miles in the sky. We all need towers that tall, I think. So that would be nice.
That's fantastic. Now, let me ask you about the first time you checked into the Maritime Mobile Net. What were the signals like from the stations that you heard in the ground?
Loud and clear. I mean, they were give them all a 5.9, 5. Yeah, that's just. It was really, really good.
And so presumably they were all hearing you well too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Now, when you get this frequency, this HF frequency that you're monitoring over the water, is that your own frequency, or are other planes on that too? And who do you connect with?
As you fly across the country, across the mainland of the United States, about, well, I believe I've been retired a while now, but there was like 20 air traffic control centers across the country. And you would get frequency changes within the actual centers. And then, it's like every 400 miles, you're getting a frequency change. Well, when you head out over the water, it's all HF, whether you're sitting sitting at the gate in Maui or approaching Tokyo, you're talking to San Francisco radio. They don't have radar out there, so it's people sitting around looking at an airspace map and just knowing where you are based on the position reports. And it sounds complicating when you first start talking about this, but once you've done it a couple of times, it just makes total sense. But you leave Phoenix, like I used to do a lot, to fly to any one of the Hawaiian Islands. As you're approaching Los Angeles, there was a VHF frequency that you could call on to San Francisco radio and request the frequencies for the crossing, they'd call it. So they'd give you a primary and a secondary. So it would be, let's say we're 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, they'd give you 11282 megahertz and like 8848 rings a bell. So they would give you two different frequencies to use. You'd start with the primary. If you started losing them on that, you would give them a call on secondary and see if they heard you there. And sometimes they would just tell you to switch to secondary because the atmosphere is changing.
Did you ever have a time when you could not contact them on either of the frequencies?
I did right at 200 crossings of the Pacific, and it worked every time. It wasn't always beautiful, and the regulation says that as soon as you enter that oceanic airspace on HF, you must maintain a listening watch. Well, I don't understand it, but a lot of pilots don't like to listen to that HF hiss all the time. I think it sounds like a symphony to me, but we were all equipped with a system called cell call. Every airplane had its own 4-letter identifier, like HPEQ, like Hotel Papa Echo Quebec would be my airplane that I'm flying that day. So they've given me the HF frequencies. As we start to coast out, I would call San Francisco radio on HF, and I'd tell him what frequency I'm on, because he's in a room with radios all over. So you got to tell him what frequency you're on so he'll know what to call you on. So I would tell them, give them flight number and then say, cell call check on 11282. Well, they knew from their list who we were going to be. So we'd listen and we'd get a bing bong sound in the cockpit, and a light would come on. So we'd call them back and say, cell call check, okay. That means you can turn the volume down on the radio, because they can just ping you if they need you. And then every hour, every time you crossed one of the navigation fixes heading out across the Pacific, you had to call and do a position report. So there was a lot of HF chatter back and forth. You'd pick up the mic, or you turn up the volume to do your report, and might have to listen to 5 other airplanes do it, before you could jump in. And you're supposed to give it to them when you're relatively close to that fix, and the report indicated I'm over this fix at this time. I'm estimating EDSI at 2144, and then you give them the name of the fix after that. And that was just like a leapfrog thing you do. And of course, we're plotting it on a chart and writing down times, and it was a lot of work, but it kept us awake.
So Larry,
yes, sir.
The HF aircraft commercial frequencies, I believe, is like 4 to 18 megahertz, correct?
I don't know the whole. I mean, it depends on what ocean you're in, what frequency you have.
Okay.
And,
well,
there's a radioreference.com anybody can go to, and it will list those frequencies and tune in and listen. It's pretty interesting. But regardless of the band, the aircraft are always upper sideband.
All right. My question is how are those frequencies assigned? Is it by location or is it by atmospheric propagation?
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah, so
Okay.
each control facility would have certain frequencies they use based on time of day. But from Los Angeles to Sydney, Australia, I talked to San Francisco, and then I forgot who it was. There was 2 whole frequencies or facilities we talked to on that 14-hour flight. So it's a huge thing. You're not changing frequencies all the time once you've established. And again, that was all in the 757. Well, in early 2017, I checked out on the Boeing 777, and that's when I was doing Australia and Hong Kong and all those places. And what a difference in technology once we got into that airplane. There was a system now that I had never seen before. It was called CPDLC, which is the Controller Pilot Data Link Communication. So based on the area you're in through this fancy box in the airplane, you would hit the button to log on to Gander if you're heading across Europe, or to Shanwick as you get across the other side. As you would log in with them, and this was all computer controlled in the airplane, you would get a reply message back that your communication's established, and now that is how you handled all your ATC communication, unless there was some really weird, odd situation going on. But it took the work out of it, because you're out over, you're about to cross the equator, and ATC wants you to climb to 36,000 feet. So they would tell you, like, they just say climb to 36,000. They give you the name of a waypoint out ahead of you and say cross this fix at flight level 360. And I had a decline or an accept button that I could hit. And if you hit decline, they'd come back with why not, and I'd say we're too heavy. We can't go that high. We got too much fuel still. So I would hit the accept button. And when you did that, it loaded all the data into the computer navigation program and changed the altitudes, got all the new wind information and the temperatures. I mean, it was an amazing thing. And I would hit accept, and then all I had to do was dial the altitude selector up and re-engage all the automation. It would stay where I was, and then when it was at the right time, it would climb, so it would cross, right on time.
Wow.
Yeah, it just got so easy. But no, the controllers cannot fly the airplane. So many civilians hear air traffic control. They think that controller is controlling airplanes. He's controlling the flow of airplanes, but not the airplane itself.
Right.
Now, did you ever try operating HF with smaller planes when you were?
I personally did not. I started out my airline career at America West. It was a startup out in Phoenix in 1983 that ended up merging with U.S. Airways and then with American. That's how that whole process went. But we had a amateur radio club at America West, call sign K7AWA. And me and my 2 older brothers are keeping K7AWA active every year at field day. This was my 17th year doing field day, and about 8 or 10 with those 2 guys. And we do it all mostly QRP with the QRP Labs QCXs or QMX this year, running 5 watts and little 2200 milliamp batteries for the whole weekend. A lot of fun with that. But anyway, one of the guys in my club, now retired, had a single engine Cessna that he put an HF radio in, made by ICOM. ICOM certifies aircraft HF radios, and that's what he had in his little, like a 185 or 182 or something. But I never did it, but he had a great time with that.
And he had an antenna on it already, or did he have to put one on?
You have to add the antenna. Yeah. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And it was, I think it was a wire antenna coming out of the top of the cab back to the top of the tail. Of course, it's highly compromised based on length and everything, but again, he's going to be at 10 or 12,000 feet.
Did your early interest in ham radio lead you toward becoming a pilot?
No, it was kind of the other way around. When I was 5 years old, I got my first airplane ride. It was from Los Angeles to Phoenix in a TWA Super G Constellation. If you remember that long skinny airplane with the 3 rudders on it. And this was 1959. I was 5 years old. And when we landed in Phoenix, the captain walked me down the stairs. My dad was standing at the bottom of the stairs to meet me. And he tells me that I told him, when I grow up, I want to be a captain for TWA, So, I mean, I was interested forever. I was pursuing that career my whole life, and it worked. To get to really, before I learned to fly big airplanes, I got into radio control. When they first come out with the digital proportional radios that were actually made the airplanes real flyable. And I had a real love for that. That was my main hobby. And the club I was in was getting bigger and bigger. And there's only so many radio channels that your radios can be on. And we had a little baton that was color coded for your frequency, and you had to carry it. If you couldn't turn your transmitter on until you had the impound stick. And it got to the point where I would go out to the field for 4 or 5 hours and get to fly once or twice because so many people waiting for the stick, Well, that's when I discovered that the JR brand radio I had a little RF module in the back you could unplug to change frequency. Well, one of the choices was 6 meters.
Wow.
If you look at the 6 meter band plan, there's a place for aircraft. So I thought that would solve everything. So I quick studied and got my ham license. Now my brother Ron, WA7GIL, got his novice when he was 15. I was 11 years old, and I watched him doing CW on the DX60, I think it was, from Heathkit that he had put together, and then he got a HW101 for graduation, but college graduation. But I watched him a lot, and he wanted all of his family to be involved, but we just never got into it. But then I found this use for it and started flying all I wanted on 6 meters. And then we had a family emergency situation that was occurring in Texas. We're all in Arizona. Brother Ron was at his cabin up in north central Arizona. We couldn't reach him. And I thought, he's got ham radio with him up there. If I had ham radio, we could have got a hold of him, and told him about this problem. We ended up having to drive up there to talk to him. I believe that's the way it went. But that's when I decided I wanted to go ahead and get a general at least. And I think 6 months later, I had my extra. And about that same time, my father got into it, and my brother Ron's twin brother, Doug, got into it as well, and his son. And at that point in time, you still had to do the 5-word a minute code, which I got through. And my father has had a real bad hearing situation where, and I'm experiencing it as well with CW, but I can kind of get by slowly. But if you would send an H, he couldn't tell if that was 3, 4, or 5 bits. And by the time he got it figured out, they were way down the road, but he worked at it, and he got through the code, and he ended up with extra class as well. But anyway, so the flying got me into ham radio. And then when I graduated from high school, I used my graduation money to start taking flying lessons, and then ended up at Arizona State University with a Air Force ROTC scholarship that was going to pay for all incidental fees in getting my degree in aero engineering technologies, which required me to get all my pilot licenses. So the Air Force paid for all that. And 2 weeks before commissioning into the Air Force, they cut 900 of us out of the program in 77 because of the fuel shortage, and they were cutting back on flying. So I became a civilian and didn't owe them any money, and that's where it went from there.
Wow, what a story. Tom and I often talk about this because of the number of hams that we interview and talk with at Hamfests and the like, that there are some commonalities in how people get involved. And ham radio, such as starting in CB or whatever. But when you look closely, every story is a little bit different. And yours is an interesting one there with the flying the little planes around. So thank you so much, Larry. It's been both a joy to talk with you about this and also very interesting and informative. And maybe even we'll have some young people who will watch this and say they want to become pilots. You never know.
You never know. Yep.
You never know. So thanks so much, Larry. This is Ham Radio Perspectives. I am Quinn, K8QS.
And I'm Tom, WA9TVD.
And Larry is W7LDT, Lima Delta Tango, if you want to look him up. And we're going to put a link down below to that rig reference site that Larry mentioned. So you can go there and get the frequencies and tune in. You said they're all upper sideband, right?
Yes. Every
Okay,
band is
great.
upper sideband.
Excellent. Thanks so much, everybody. Please comment down below. Give us a thumbs up if you like this. Suggest topics for future videos. 73, everybody.
7-3.